Did I ever tell you about the time that death visited me in a dream? Not a dream where I died, but a true encounter with death itself. It was one of those rare dreams that is strange, funny, unsettling, and, to my surprise, profoundly kind. It began on a narrow path, winding through a world that had already let go of summer, where bare trees lifted their dark fingers into the pale sky, and the ground lay thick with copper, rust, and golden leaves, whispering beneath my feet. To one side rose a sheer mountain wall, silent, covered in the skeletons of trees, their roots covered by crackling leaves. And to the other side stood what first looked like a fence, but was not made of wood or wire, only great drifts of fallen leaves, pressed together as if the forest itself had built a boundary from what had already fallen. The air felt like late October, that moment just after the harvest when the world exhales and begins its slow return to the soil. I was walking alone when I saw something ahead. It was floating, still and unmistakable. It was death. Not a skeleton with a scythe, but a figure in long brown robes which moved softly in a wind I could not feel. Its face was a human skull with thin, papery skin still clinging to the bone like old parchment. It was floating in complete stillness and silence, save for the light drifting of the robe. It did not speak or move. Its face was towards me, and both of its arms were stretched out to its sides. And in its right hand, raised as one might raise a ritual blade, it held a severed human arm. Terror rose in me like cold water, for in the dream I knew there were only two directions, forward or backward. And I also knew with complete certainty that turning back would not save me. Then, from the depths of my memory, came a line attributed to Rumi. If you see something frightening in the graveyard, run towards it and it will disappear. So I ran straight toward death, my heart pounding, the leaves blurring beneath my feet. And when I reached it, I stopped. I looked up very shyly and very ridiculously said, "Hey!" I have no idea what possessed me to do what I did next, but honestly, what else was I supposed to do? I reached out and I high-fived the severed arm in Death's hands. There was a long pause. Death looked at me, then it slowly lifted up its other hand and face-palmed. I woke up no longer afraid of dying, not because anything had been explained to me, but because I had met the symbol head-on, the archetype, the spirit of death, not with force and not with avoidance, but with contact. And in that absurd and sacred moment, living hand to rotting hand, fear changed its shape into laughter, into reverence, or perhaps into a little bit of both. I always joke with my friends now that when I die, death is never going to stop making fun of me. I didn't know it at the time, but this dream was the perfect teaching for the subject of this video, which is light and shadow in the tree of life, and why they can never truly be separated. In the previous orientation video, we explored the tree of life not as a ladder to climb, but as a map of consciousness and relationship. Not a hierarchy, but a holographic whole in which every part contains the pattern or blueprint of the full tree. And yet every map has its distortions and every light casts a shadow. And so we come to what some call the tree of death. In classical Kabbalistic language, the Sephirot, the 10 emanations or energy centers of divine energy, exist not in isolation, but in a delicate balance. And when a Sephirot is held alone, such as Keter, when a force is removed from relationship with the rest of the tree, something happens. The energy distorts, it collapses, it hardens, and it becomes a shell, a Qliphoth. And these shells, collectively known as the Qliphoth, are often misunderstood as the evil inverse of the tree of life. But this is not another tree, and it is not an opposite. It is a distortion, a reflection in broken glass. The tree of death is not a hidden demon world, but the same energies of the tree of life, but without integration, without connection, and without containment. Love can easily become obsession in this distortion. Discipline can become control, and vision becomes delusion. Shadow is not evil, but energy that has lost its place in the whole. The fear we feel when we approach shadow, that sense of darkness or danger, often arises not from the reality of what we are seeing, but from the suddenness of seeing it without context. For when something is pulled out of relationship with the whole, with time, support, and with the meaning, it becomes alien and frightening, the monster in the graveyard. And as Rumi reminds us, when you run towards it, it disappears, or sometimes it face palms, in my case. In the rest of this video, we will explore what shadow actually is, not as a moral failure, but as an imbalance, how the Qliphoth mirror the Sephirot, how spiritual harm arises not from too much darkness, but from too much light without grounding, and how integration, not purity, is the true medicine. And we will begin to trace the principle of polarity, how light and darkness, expansion and contraction, joy and grief are not enemies, but points on a single spectrum. But before we go further, I want to say this clearly. Working with a shadow is not inherently dangerous. It becomes dangerous only when rushed, when we try to face what we are not yet resourced inside to hold, when we isolate insight from embodiment, and when we seek power without understanding the holistic relationship. And so we will go slowly, not to avoid depth, but to make the depth safe. And I invite you to stop any time and return as needed, to go at your own pace as slowly as you need, and to seek outside support if needed. Because this is deep healing work, and support is always wise. As with all the Tree of Life teachings, I will be using the spiral method, repeating concepts from different angles and traditions to both reinforce each concept for you, but to also give more opportunities for deeper exploration and understanding. The tree does not ask you to transcend the world. It asks you to inhabit it fully. And just as I met death on that narrow path, not with dogma or denial, but with a strange little high five, you too can meet the parts of yourself you have feared. And you may find that the shadow, like death, is not trying to hurt you, but is trying to be seen and is trying to come home in understanding. You are always fully responsible for your own spiritual journey and your own choices. The tree invites you to come back into balance. The Tree of Life is not a story of purity versus corruption. It is a system of relationship, of how qualities hold and balance one another. Shadow is not a separate thing. It is not evil. It is not outside of the tree. What we call the tree of death or the Qliphoth is not its opposite. It is what happens when the same forces of the tree of life become unbalanced, become exaggerated, or severed from context. Every Sephirot energy, center quality, is a gift when in relationship and a distortion when isolated. Warmth sustains life, but too much heat will burn you. Structure creates safety, but too much structure will suffocate. Desire brings vitality, but desire without grounding becomes compulsion. Shadow arises when a quality becomes too much, too fast, or too cut off from the rest of the psyche to be held properly. It is not an invader. It is a signal, a call for integration. As I always say, emotional pain imbalance, and distortions. These are not our enemies. These are arrows pointing us directly towards where we can repair our foundational issues. The Qliphoth are the hardened shells, not demons in some distant underworld, but the residue of forces we have exiled within ourselves, misunderstood, or even rushed. They are parts of the tree that have lost relationship to the whole. They are the broken vessels. Just as our nervous system cannot process more emotion than it is ready to hold, the soul cannot integrate more light than its containers can support. In the first video, we explored the ancient Kabbalistic myth of the shattering of the vessels, how the divine light entered the 10 vessels, but the lower ones could not contain it, and so they broke. And that breaking gave rise to the Qliphoth, the shells that hold distorted divine energy. But this break was not only energetic, it was also relational. But there is a second part to that story, and it is one that speaks directly to our human experience of shadow and separation. It is the exile of the Shekhinah, the divine feminine presence. In the language of the mystics, when the vessels shattered, the light did not simply vanish. It fell, it scattered, it became hidden. And with it, the Shekhinah, the aspect of the divine that dwells within creation, entered a long exile. This is not a myth of punishment. It is a myth of estrangement, of how the sacred can become lost within the world and even within ourselves. The Shekhinah became buried in the fallen sparks of light, in the body and the earth, and in our very traumas and shadow selves. The exile of the Shekhinah is the exile of wholeness. When we exile a part of ourselves, a need, a feeling, a truth, we participate in the same cosmic pattern. And so, when we do the work of integration, when we turn toward the shadow, we are not only healing our psyches, we are gathering sparks. We are bringing the Shekhinah home. In this way, shadow work becomes sacred work, a form of tikkun or repair, not to perfect the self, but to reunite what was divided. The mystics teach that the Shekhinah weeps in exile, not because she is weak, but because her weeping is the call to healing. Every time we witness what we once exiled, every time we welcome back a truth or a part of the soul we tried to abandon or repress, we become agents of that return. We participate in the repair of the world and ourselves. And this is why the Tree of Life is never just a model for spiritual ascent. It is a map of return. It shows us how to reunite what has been broken, not by rejecting the world, but by seeing the divine within the world, even its shadow, even its pain, even in the fallen sparks. Shadow appears not because light failed, but because it was unbalanced. This is why the mystic's path is not a path of escape into the light, but the path of sacred balance. So as we move through the 32 pathways in this series, we will not only talk about the light aspect of each pathway, but also its distortion, so you know what to look out for. Now, a brief but important note before we continue. Sometimes when people begin meditating on the Sephirot, especially those with complex trauma or dissociation, they may notice that certain spheres feel like they are in the wrong place. For example, they may feel chesed, the energy of loving kindness, not on the left, but on the right. Or they may feel boundaries, severity, or judgment on the wrong side of the body. This is not actually unusual. What is happening is that the internal tree may have become mirrored as a result of trauma. Internal fragmentation, survival, it can cause that to happen. In these cases, the psyche reverses certain energies as a form of protection, like flipping a map upside down to flee danger. This mirrored configuration has deep connections to the Qliphoth, not in the sense of evil or possession, but as the distorted shadows of divine emanations, formed through fear, guilt, or abandonment wounds. Recognizing this mirrored tree is a sacred first step toward realigning your inner world with the true flow of the light. So if you have experienced this, take heart. You are not broken. Your tree is not backwards. It is simply learning how to stand upright again. There is a principle sometimes taught in Hermetic traditions called the Law of Polarity. It reminds us that hot and cold are not opposites, but rather they are both points on a single spectrum, hot, cold. So too with light, darkness, joy, grief, fear, and love. Shadow becomes frightening when we believe it is something foreign or forbidden. But in truth, it is movement along a shared spectrum, the same light simply appearing at a different frequency. Imagine a pendulum. When it swings too far in one direction, toward too much light, too much expansion, too much intensity, it will naturally swing back. This is not a failure, it is the law of return. We see this emotionally as inspiration followed by fatigue, psychologically as certainty followed by doubt, and spiritually as breakthroughs followed by withdrawal. The swing is not the problem. The resistance to it is. Much of what we fear as darkness is simply the psyche correcting imbalance. And much of what causes spiritual harm is not the content of what we learn, but the speed at which we try to integrate it. The tree responds not to ambition, but to integration. You do not climb it, you inhabit it. Each Sephirot expresses a particular quality: grounding, imagination, structure, love, discernment. But when we try to develop one part of ourselves in isolation, let's say focusing on spiritual insight, crown, heaven, Keter, without embodiment, kingdom, our human lives, Malkut, we encounter distortion. Insight without grounding leads to dissociation. Love without boundaries dissolves the self. Willpower without empathy becomes cruelty. The Qliphoth are not monsters hiding in some secret occult realm. They are the same archetypes of the tree, but misaligned, over-identified, inflated, or banished from acceptance. Let's take an example from a pathway on the tree itself to illustrate this idea. Malkuth, or kingdom, is the sphere of physical reality, our body and the material world, and the immediate senses. It is the ground of our being, the culmination of the energies of the tree into manifestation here in the physical world. Yesod, foundation, the Sephirot located in the pelvis. On the other hand, this one has to do with the subconscious, the realm of dreams, of symbols, of memory, and the astral body. It is governed by the moon, and thus illusion, reflection, imagination, and cycles. The pathway between Malkuth and Yesod, therefore the transition from purely material to the psycho-spiritual. It is the awakening of the inner life. The realization that reality is not only what is seen, but what is felt, remembered, and intuited. This balance would be the fully realized pathway between these two Sephirot. In the shadow or Qliphoth, the distorted path, this path is distorted when the person remains bound to illusions, fantasies, projections, and escapism. Rather than lifting up the material into meaning, they descend into delusion, confusing the astral with the real, or using the imagination to avoid reality rather than spiritualize it. So the tree of life aspect of the path between Malkut and Yesod is the balanced awakening of the inner life. The shadow distortion of this path is delusion and escapism. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is made of the parts of ourselves that were disowned, not because they were bad, but because they were unwelcome, misunderstood, or unsafe to express. Jungian psychologist Robert Bly calls this our shadow bag. Basically, we are not born inherently knowing what our society thinks is acceptable or not acceptable, obviously. So as we grow up, our parents, friends, classmates, teachers, everyone around us, even on TV and stuff, they all subtly and not so subtly tell us exactly what they believe is okay for us to express or what we should not be expressing. For example, a child is playing in the mud. It seems fine, fun, and exciting. A parent chastises the child for getting messy. Now playing in the mud is filed away as bad or wrong. The act itself is inherently neutral. This shadow bag is not just full of bad things, but also things that we may have loved or cherished. If a child loves singing and someone makes an offhand remark about how lame it is, they may feel like this activity of singing that brings them joy will be responded to with criticism. And in this way, even good things can be shoved into the shadow bag. So it is often filled with anger, unmet needs, our fears, our vulnerabilities, that's a big one, and even joy and ease. These become shadow when we exile them, like the Shekhinah. The Qliphoth name this same phenomenon, not as pathology, but as imbalance. They are not here to be feared. They are here to be understood. A healthy immune system protects the body. An overactive immune system attacks itself. The function is the same. The balance is always the key. One of the most destabilizing spiritual strategies is trying to remain only in the light, avoiding anger instead of listening to it, avoiding fear instead of understanding and facing it, avoiding your limitations instead of learning from them. But what is avoided does not disappear. It becomes unconscious. And unconscious forces act without consent, without your consent. This is the heart of shadow work, not descent into darkness, but protection through wholeness. In his book, Silence, Thich Nhat Hanh gives a metaphor about our consciousness being like a house, and our subconscious and unconscious are the basement. Everything that happens in our lives is a seed, and we are taught very young to throw these seeds into our basements, pretend they're not there, to hide these uncomfortable truths and ignore the things we were told are wrong. But even though we cannot see these seeds day to day and what they're doing, they continue to grow. And after many years, they explode through the floor of your kitchen and cannot be ignored anymore. And so it is with the shadow. It will act out in greater and greater ways to be seen. So it is best to give it the attention and healing it needs when it asks lightly, because its voice will become thunderous if it is ignored. It will tear apart your inner and outer sanctuaries if you do not attend to it. So please get the help you need if you need assistance with all this. As we learn to meet what we have pushed away, we reclaim agency over ourselves. We reconnect the circuits of the tree. We allow truth to flow through the pathways, even the difficult truths. As I shared in the dream at the beginning of this video, there is a line attributed to Rumi. If you see something frightening in the graveyard, run towards it and it will disappear. This does not mean to recklessly pursue things that you are not ready for. It means that fear dissolves in the presence of awareness. When we turn to face what we once feared, we often find not a monster, but a misunderstood fragment of the self, still carrying its original light. Sometimes it just takes a high five to break the spell. And I'm sure that you've noticed people projecting around you, right? So basically, whatever they feel is broken within them, they project onto the people around them. And it's so obvious, right, when you've done the work. But if you haven't done the work, it can just be happening constantly. And even when you have done a lot of the work, there are still levels of it to be constantly uncovered. And that's where the saying that says, what agitates you about another can teach you so much about yourself. Each person is responsible for how they engage with these teachings. But this is not a burden. It is an expression of sovereignty. The tree does not punish imbalance. It reveals it for you as a gift. And what is revealed can be reintegrated. There is no shame here, only honesty and the path of return. In the next video, we will explore how movement actually happens on the tree, not as linear progress, but as dynamic unfolding. We will look at the role of Da'at, the secret Sephirot, as a threshold space of inner knowing. And we will learn about the left, right, and middle pillars and how ascent and descent form a single rhythm. We will also be covering in the next few episodes practical integration into your life of these. I mean, we're talking about all these deep concepts, right? It's very theoretical so far. We're going to start grounding that more in your day-to-day life, especially so that as you move into the pathways in the Sephirot, that you can walk those pathways and it actually have practical application in improving your life. We will also be covering a couple of rituals that you can do or you can skip that are meant to help you on your journey through the tree. One is the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. One is the middle pillar ritual. Can't say that. And both of these I will give the sort of traditional versions of, but I will also give some alternate versions of that, and then give the historical and or spiritual reasoning behind the alterations. But the most important thing about that is that you get to choose. You can actually recreate the whole ritual more adapted to whatever your belief system is. It's fine. Because remember, we're talking in symbology here and shadow work and communication between the conscious and the unconscious mind. But for now, there is nothing more to do. Only take notice. Let's take a moment here and let this settle. Let yourself feel whatever has risen. Curiosity, discomfort, relief. There is no need to resolve it right now. Just meet it where it is. That is the work. When you are ready, return to your day gently. Carry with you only what feels nourishing. Leave the rest. It will be here if you need it later. You're not behind. You are walking at the speed of integration. Go in peace, beloveds, and return when the Spirit stirs within you.